King John Lackland. His name is etched in English history as the tyrannical monarch who lost his continental empire and was forced by rebellious barons to sign the Magna Carta. That is the political story of failure. The terrifying truth, hidden beneath the official records, is that King John was a monster of unrestrained personal sadism and depravity. His reign of terror was characterized by systematic cruelty. He stole the wives of his own nobles, starved his enemies to death in dungeons, and personally carried out the cold-blooded murder of his own nephew. His tyranny was fueled by two terrifying forces: absolute greed for money and insatiable lust for power over others. He saw his kingdom and his subjects not as a trust, but as a vast collection of possessions to be consumed and abused. The greatest secret of the Plantagenet dynasty is that the Magna Carta was not signed to grant freedom, but to stop the systematic, sadistic destruction of the nobility's honor and families by the king himself. Don't you dare look away. Watch this entire deep-dive documentary and subscribe to Crown of Dread, and you will learn the one shocking record that details the ultimate political crime: the king's personal decision to starve a mother and her son to death in a dungeon. The agonizing core of his reign of terror began with a direct, personal act of regicide against his own blood. King John's reign was constantly threatened by rivals, the most legitimate being his young nephew, Arthur of Brittany, the son of his older brother. The cold, calculated elimination of Arthur is one of the darkest, most enduring secrets of the Plantagenet dynasty. Arthur, captured by John's forces in 1202, was initially imprisoned. The historical record suggests that John, consumed by paranoia and the need for absolute authority, either personally murdered the boy or ordered his immediate, secret execution. The most chilling account claims that John stabbed the young prince with his own hands and then dumped the body into the River Seine, weighted with stones. This brutal, personal act of regicide was not a military necessity. It was a crime of convenience, cementing John's image as a ruthless, paranoid monster. The Crown immediately fabricated a story of Arthur's escape or natural death. This act is the ultimate historical precedent for eliminating family threats to secure power. John showed that for a tyrant, personal safety always outweighs familial bond, a tactic used by dictators to prevent any alternative source of legitimacy. But the most shocking secret of the king's personal life was the terrifying ritual he performed to publicly shame the wives of his enemies. King John's lust was as unchecked as his tyranny. He viewed the wives and daughters of his nobles and enemies not as women, but as political and sexual possessions, using them to satisfy his desires and enforce his power. When a noble family was suspected of disloyalty, John would frequently demand that the noble's wife or daughter be handed over to the royal court as a hostage to guarantee the husband's good behavior. These women were then often subjected to sexual abuse and forced compliance by the king and his inner circle. This was a calculated act of humiliation. By defiling the honor of a noble's wife, John was permanently breaking the spirit of the family and sending a clear message: your dignity, your family, and your honor belong to me. This was a terrifying, systematic weaponization of sexual violence for political control. This historical pattern illustrates the ultimate display of totalitarian power. John showed that when a ruler can violate the most sacred trust, marital fidelity, and familial honor, all forms of social resistance collapse under the weight of absolute shame. But the true depth of the king's financial cruelty was the horrifying punishment reserved for the families who failed to pay their debts. King John's avarice was insatiable. When the nobility challenged him, his vengeance was often cold, calculated, and terrifyingly final. The tragic fate of Matilde de Braos and her son remains the most infamous example of his financial cruelty. Matilde de Braos, the wife of a powerful baron who defied John, was arrested along with her eldest son. John, Unable to seize the husband, decided to punish the family through the most agonizing, slow method: starvation. Mother and son were imprisoned in the deepest dungeon of Corfe Castle, where they were systematically denied food and water. The official records remain chillingly precise. Mother and son died of forced deprivation. This was not an execution. It was a political murder carried out over a prolonged period, ensuring the maximum psychological agony for both the victims and the remaining family members. This act demonstrates the terrifying historical power of weaponized negligence. John showed that a ruler can inflict absolute agony by simply withdrawing the necessities of life, a form of systemic cruelty that is harder to track but no less devastating than overt torture. But the king's most degrading act was his terrifying reliance on foreign mercenaries, a political dependency that humiliated the English nobility. King John's deep distrust of his own English barons and nobility led him to rely heavily on foreign mercenaries, soldiers from France, Flanders, and other regions, to enforce his tyrannical will. This reliance was a major source of humiliation for the native English elite. John used these ruthless mercenaries to carry out the most brutal acts of his reign: extortion, land seizure, and the suppression of dissent. These foreign soldiers, who owed no loyalty to the English people or their laws, acted with absolute impunity, terrorizing the countryside and enriching themselves at the expense of the English populace. This dependency created a profound political crisis. The English barons, seeing their land ravaged and their people terrorized by foreign soldiers paid by their own king, realized that John was not a true English monarch, but a tyrant who saw his kingdom as a mere possession to be exploited. This betrayal ultimately fueled the rebellion that led to the Magna Carta. We have traced the monstrous appetite and the political cruelty, but the darkest secret remains: the final, terrifying medical mistake that accelerated his final agonizing death. King John's avarice was as insatiable as his temper. He perfected the art of financial terrorism, viewing the royal treasury as his own private, unlimited coffer and his subjects as endless sources of revenue. John developed a chilling system of arbitrary fines and taxes known as scutage, often demanding money from barons multiple times a year, far exceeding the legally required rate. His officials would routinely seize the lands, goods, and even the wives of debtors. The most infamous was his treatment of the Jewish community, whom he repeatedly imprisoned and brutally tortured until they paid colossal, crippling ransoms. One surviving, terrifying account details his treatment of a wealthy Jewish man named Aaron of Lincoln, who was subjected to having his teeth systematically pulled out, one per day, until he agreed to pay the impossible debt. This brutal financial torture was John's personal signature. This demonstrates the historical danger of weaponized taxation. John showed that when a totalitarian ruler views the state as personal property, the financial system becomes a tool of brutal, systematic extortion, a pattern seen in corrupt regimes that prioritize personal enrichment over national stability. But the ultimate insult to the English nobility was the king's bizarre, humiliating rule regarding his own marriage. King John's desire to humiliate his enemies was often intertwined with his personal depravity. He saw the wives of his rebellious barons as both sexual conquests and political trophies. When a noble family refused to submit to his arbitrary fines, John would issue a terrifying command. He would publicly announce his intention to marry the wife or daughter of the noble to one of his own foreign mercenary agents. This threat, to forcibly merge a noble English bloodline with a despised foreign mercenary, was considered the ultimate political and social defilement. This threat was so devastating to the family honor and lineage that many nobles immediately capitulated, paying the ruinous fine to protect their women from this act of forced misalliance and humiliation. The king used the threat of sexual and social destruction as his most effective tool of political coercion. This situation illustrates the terrifying historical precedent of weaponizing lineage and marriage. John showed that forcing a politically humiliating sexual union is a powerful way to destroy a rival's social standing, a tactic that preys on deep-seated societal fears about purity and honor. But the most shocking secret of his table was a terrifying, constant fear that led him to execute his own cook. King John's awareness of his own tyranny made him one of the most paranoid rulers in English history. He lived in constant fear of assassination by poison, especially given the chaos of the court and his endless array of enemies. John was obsessed with preventing poisonings. He employed a massive retinue of tasters and kitchen staff who were subjected to terrifying scrutiny. In one chilling account, after an attempt on his life or a suspicious illness, John reportedly ordered the execution of his own royal cook, simply as a terror tactic to deter future attempts. The cook was an arbitrary victim, paying the ultimate price for the king's paranoia. This act of random public cruelty sent a clear message to the entire household. The king's safety was absolute, and any mistake, even an accident, would be punished with terrifying finality. The kitchen, supposedly a place of creation, became a constant theater of fear. This illustrates the terrifying historical reality of paranoia dictating state action. John showed that unchecked fear can lead to the random execution of the innocent, proving that a tyrant's inner security is often maintained by sacrificing the lives of his least powerful servants. But the true depth of his political cynicism was the horrifying punishment he reserved for his own legitimate son, a subtle, calculated act of humiliation. King John's cruelty extended even to his own legitimate son and heir, the young Prince Henry, later Henry III. John viewed his family not as a source of affection, but as political pawns to be used for his own immediate gain. During his military campaigns, John frequently used his young son as a literal political hostage, leaving him in the care of foreign mercenaries or politically unstable allies to guarantee military aid or loyalty. This was a direct, cynical manipulation of his own son's life and safety. Furthermore, John was reportedly cold and neglectful toward his children, reserving his attention for his mistresses and political schemes. This created an atmosphere where the heir to the throne was constantly vulnerable, emotionally abused, and used as a disposable bargaining chip by his own father. This demonstrates the ultimate historical lesson that tyranny corrupts parental bonds. John showed that systems of absolute power compel rulers to prioritize political strategy over basic familial love, viewing their own children as mere tools of statecraft. But the darkest secret of his tyranny was a bizarre, humiliating ritual he reserved for the wives of his foreign enemies. King John often captured high-ranking noblewomen and even former queens from his continental enemies. His treatment of these women was designed not for ransom, but for maximum public and psychological humiliation. John reportedly enjoyed subjecting these captured noblewomen to public, humiliating rituals, often forcing them to attend his court, dressed in rags or visibly dirty, torn clothing, in stark contrast to the opulence of his palace. This was done to break the spirit of the captured woman and send a brutal message to her husband or ruler that John had complete political and personal dominion over their honor. This calculated act of humiliation was a terrifying form of psychological warfare. By attacking the dignity of the female nobility, John demonstrated his absolute disregard for the rules of medieval honor and civilized warfare. This illustrates the historical tactic of using public shame as a tool of political warfare. John showed that humiliation can be a more effective weapon than imprisonment, forcing the victim and their family into absolute submission through social terror. We have traced the monstrous appetite and the brutality. But the darkest secret remains, the bizarre ritual his own soldiers performed over his body to ensure their political survival. King John died, hated, and feared. His own loyal soldiers, facing a rebellion and a young heir, Prince Henry III, knew that their political survival depended on immediately managing the king's death and concealing the true circumstances. John's body was quickly and crudely embalmed. His soldiers then performed a deliberate act of political theater. They publicly displayed the king's effigy, not his actual body, during the funeral procession, carefully hiding his decomposing remains. This was done to maintain the illusion of continuity and stability during the chaotic transition of power. The soldiers feared that revealing the king's death too quickly would lead to a collapse of loyalty and a violent power vacuum. The dead body was treated as a political liability that had to be carefully managed until the young heir was safely crowned. This illustrates the historical precedent of propaganda in succession. The soldiers showed that control over the narrative of the ruler's death is essential for ensuring the survival of the state apparatus, a tactic used by regimes to manage transition. But the most shocking punishment John inflicted on his rivals was reserved for the children, a political ritual of infant imprisonment. King John's cruelty extended to the most innocent members of his rivals' families. He understood that controlling the children was the ultimate political leverage against the rebellious barons. John systematically took the children of rebellious barons as political hostages, imprisoning them in royal castles like the Tower of London. These children were often treated poorly and separated from their families for years. This barbaric act was designed to force the fathers to surrender or cease their rebellion, fearing for the lives of their offspring. The king often used the threat of starvation or execution against these children, turning the royal nurseries into political prisons. This was a direct, calculated attack on the baron's family honor and personal morality. This demonstrates the ultimate historical use of human hostages for political coercion. John showed that targeting the vulnerable is the most effective way to break the will of powerful opposition, a tactic that violates all moral laws. But the ultimate symbol of the king's tyranny was a simple, everyday object found in his grave, a ring that sealed a dark pact. King John's grave, like his life, remains shrouded in mystery. But one small, highly symbolic object found near his remains provides the final chilling testament to his dark political life. A single, plain gold ring. This ring was not a crown jewel, but a simple personal ring, believed to have been given to John by one of his political allies, a pledge of loyalty or a symbol of a secret pact. John was buried with this ring, not with his magnificent regalia, suggesting that in his final moments, he prioritized the loyalty of his political conspirators over the symbols of his divine right. The ring is a silent witness to the network of betrayal and conspiracy that defined his reign. It proves that John's final thoughts were focused on the secular world of plots and power, not on God or salvation. This historical relic symbolizes the personal cost of political obsession. John's final choice of artifact shows that for the tyrant, the ultimate security lies not in divine faith, but in the brittle promises of political allies. But the ultimate act of historical hypocrisy was the elevation of King John's tomb, an honor granted to a tyrant by the very church he had defied. King John died after a lifelong, violent conflict with the Catholic Church, including a period where he was excommunicated by the Pope. Yet, his final burial was conducted with full religious honors inside Worcester Cathedral, a place of profound sanctity. The burial of the tyrannical, excommunicated king in such a sacred spot was a profound act of political hypocrisy by the Church. The Church needed to prove that royal authority, even in death, remained sacred. By burying the tyrant with honor, they reinforced the political order, placing the sanctity of the crown above the moral judgment of his personal crimes. This ritualized forgiveness was essential to the political stability of the time. The Church sacrificed moral integrity to maintain its relationship with the new young king, Henry III, ensuring that the rebellion would not threaten the structural power of both the monarchy and the clergy. This demonstrates the chilling historical reality of religious power serving political expediency. The Church's decision proves that moral principles are often compromised when faced with the absolute necessity of maintaining state power and order. We have witnessed the terror, the gluttony, and the betrayal. Now, for the final critical verdict. We must confront the ultimate cost of his spite. We have unsealed the horrifying secrets of King John Lackland, the sadistic lust, the murder of his nephew, the starvation of his enemies, and the complete humiliation of the English nobility. The king ruled not by law, but by spite, greed, and the use of foreign mercenaries. John's tyranny led directly to the signing of the Magna Carta, the foundational document of liberty, proving that absolute cruelty often gives birth to freedom. The crown of dread was used to enforce tyranny, but it ironically gave rise to democracy. We have revealed the entire horrifying truth. But now, we turn the final question to you, the crown of dread audience. King John's tyranny reached its peak with the murder of his own nephew, Arthur, and the starvation of Matilda de Braos and her son. Do you believe that the political consequences of his absolute cruelty, the signing of the Magna Carta, and the subsequent birth of common law were worth the lives and suffering of his victims? Let the world know your verdict. Drop your opinion in the comments below. Subscribe to Crown of Dread for more hidden history and find the truth buried beneath the oldest thrones.